Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to the regularly scheduled meeting of the Oklahoma City Board of Adjustment for April the 5th, 2018. I'm going to call the meeting to order, and just a couple of quick housekeeping items. If you would, please turn your cell phones to silent. If there is a matter you want to be heard on today and you're not the applicant, you can fill out one of these little white sheets of paper that are out on the front table and provide those to Cindy, and we'll make sure and call you when it's time to hear that item. And if you would, when you get to the microphone, if you're going to speak, please be sure when you get there, speak right into it and give us your name and address for the record. With that, we'll get started. Our first order of business is to receive the minutes of the March 15, 2018 meeting.
So moved.
Well, item number 7 needed some additional language. That request was approved on the condition that the property remained in the configuration as submitted. So that would be my only change.
What do we need to do to amend that? Is it just kind of, we can read that into the record? Okay. So with the amendment or addition to item number 7, I'll take a motion to receive the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to receive the minutes. Please cast your votes, please. And the minutes are received. Next order of business is continuance or withdrawal request. We didn't have any beforehand, but I think we do have a couple. Is that right?
We do have two. Item number 2, case number 14451 is requesting to continue that to the April 19th meeting.
Is there anyone here that wanted to be heard on that matter today? Again, that's case number 14451. If not, I'll take a motion to continue.
I move to continue case number 14451 to the April 19th agenda.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to continue case number 14451 to the April 19th meeting. Please cast your votes, please. And the item is continued.
We also have item number 4, case number 14455 is requesting to be continued to the May 17th meeting.
Is there anyone here that wanted to be heard on that matter today? Again, that's case 14455. If none and there's no objection, I'll take a motion on that item as well.
Make a motion to continue case number 14455 to May 17th.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to continue case number 14455 to May 17th. Please cast your votes. And the item is continued.
We have item number 1, case number 14446, request for a variance to the required sidewalk along an arterial street in the I-1 Light Industrial District located at 9526 South Shields Boulevard.
Vida Ostovar, 9526 South Shields Boulevard. And this is my husband. He's also the owner. So.
I'm Kevin Lasani, same address.
Even though we've heard it before, if you would, go ahead and tell us a little bit about your application.
Yes, we've been required to build a sidewalk, and there is not enough space to put the sidewalk there. Now there is a paragraph added that has been discussed at the city. I guess the public work and the engineering also approved that building a sidewalk there is impractical. And last time we talked, you mentioned about a fee in lieu of building the sidewalk. We did additional research, and the fee in lieu of sidewalk is in case if the city has a scheduled project for improvement, and there is no scheduled project improvement. So therefore, there should not be a fee in lieu of.
I would point out, as she said, also we heard the case on 15th, and we had asked for some additional clarification from staff. Public Works put in our application that they review and agree that the grading and drainage improvements that exist along the frontage of the address are really not conducive to the installation of a sidewalk, which was one of the things we talked about before. So I'll also clarify for the record, we talked about this last time, but correct me if I'm wrong, but we are not at this time, there's a pending ordinance, but we are not at this time able to even apply a fee in lieu of sidewalk. Is that correct? Okay. Is there anybody else that wanted to be heard on this matter today? Board members?
I mean, I think everybody knows my position on this is, I understand that the topography makes it impractical to put a sidewalk there at this time. I hate to grant the variance because it's, it stays. And I'm sorry that there's not a mechanism for being able to do a fee in lieu of. And so I'm not against you. What happens, though, is if we grant this variance, what we end up with is places in the city where a sidewalk will eventually probably occur, and then places where it can't occur because we've granted the variance. And so you've got sidewalks that lead to nowhere when the intent was to create a good, comprehensive, complete system of sidewalks so that people could walk safely around the city. And even though this location may not be conducive to pedestrian traffic now, we don't know what it will be in the years ahead. And that's the reason that I am, I hate to grant the variance, not because I'm trying to create a hardship for you, but because I don't want it to be a variance that cannot be reversed.
Other comments? I agree. You were required to come here because you tried to obtain a permit, correct?
We already have temporary occupancy. We have the permit, we build. We had the permit before there was required a sidewalk.
Right, but what caused you to have to come to seek a variance for the sidewalk now?
Because they did not give us permanent occupancy, and we need the permanent occupancy.
So that's my issue, is I'm in complete agreement with the desire of the city to put these sidewalks together, and routinely people come before us and just ask for them essentially because I guess they just want to see if we're not paying attention. There have been other instances, and I think this is a great example. It's very similar, although each case stands on its own, where there is impractical reasons why a sidewalk here is not appropriate, and these folks are trying to get a permit to run their business. The city has not provided us a mechanism, feed in lieu of or otherwise. So in my view, tie goes to the runner, right?
And I'm going to support your application. I'm not going to deny you the opportunity to do business there because it's really the city's obligation to have a mechanism in place so that where the topography and other factors make it impractical to put a sidewalk now, there is some way to collect a fee in lieu of that so that in time, a sidewalk might be, and right now that's not in place with the city. But it sounds to me like it's forthcoming.
Yeah, to your comment, we are in the process. In fact, we've drafted an ordinance, and it's in review now, to allow in these type of situations for Public Works to accept the fee.
And I think that's what we need is because there are times and places where, putting a sidewalk now is not practical. But instead of granting a variance that you cannot reverse, then there's a way to collect a fee instead of. So I've reluctantly am going to support your application so that you can proceed with your business, because it's through no fault of your own that we don't have a mechanism in place.
Can you just help me?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, could you just help me understand how it's more dangerous not to have a sidewalk? Or to have a sidewalk there? Because by my estimation, people are still going to either walk on this grassy piece or on the street if there's not a sidewalk.
Well,
and the canal there or the ditch there is still going to be a hazard whether there's a sidewalk there or not. So can you just help me appreciate how it's more dangerous to have a sidewalk?
I think putting a sidewalk is inviting more people. This is the sidewalk, you walk here. But if there is no sidewalk, then nobody try to walk there. And to put a sidewalk next to a high speed, even though it's a street, it's a boulevard, but cars go very fast there. So just building a sidewalk right next to the street is very dangerous. And also on the other side, there is the ditch and with big boulders. So let's say a kid is walking on the sidewalk going home, and the wind blow and the kid fall on those boulders, or on the other side, high traffic, so then that's dangerous to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point is that people will avoid this area if there's not a sidewalk there. I just don't think they will. I think they're going to walk there anyway. They're just going to walk on the grass, and the wind blows whether there's a sidewalk there or not. So I'm not currently in support of this application.
I would like to comment, the issue is whether or not they meet the requisites for the variance application in this particular case. The in lieu of is not an issue right now. But with respect to the requisites for granting a variance, Indian Public Works has come back and they said they've reviewed, agree that the grading and drainage improvements are not configured for the placement of an urban sidewalk at this time, and so I think they meet the requisites for the granting of a variance.
Well, we appear to have spoken our piece. Is there a motion that someone would like to make?
I'll make a motion to approve the variance requests and that the applicant has met the required statutory standards for that request.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the variance for case number 14446. Please cast your votes, please. And the application is approved.
Thank you.
Item number 3, case number 14454, request for a variance to the 15-foot corner side building setback in the R1 single-family residential district located at 2236 Northwest 18th Street.
Is the applicant present? Please come forward and give us your name and address for the record.
Hi, thanks for considering our case. I'm Tom Fredgren, 211 East Dawes, Norman, Oklahoma. We do a lot of restoration for 35 years and remodel. And these two older gentlemen requested that we enclose this front side porch of theirs. Apparently it's 4 feet short of the distance from the center line of the street adjoining. So we're hoping that you can make an exception. Yeah, there I am, by golly.
You're famous.
One of these older guys actually uses oxygen, and it would be easier on him than having to climb up and down the stairs a lot during the day. Any questions?
Board members, any questions for the applicant? Is there anyone here who wants to be heard on this matter today? I'd point out that the home has been in its current configuration as constructed since 1927.
And I actually do have some photos of, I took some photos from my van of a 4-block area radius of this house, and there are a whole lot of homes that are closer to the street than this one even.
Discussion, questions, motion.
I support the application. I move to approve application 14454 for the reasons it meets the statutory requirements.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the variance for case number 14454. Please cast your votes, please. The application is approved.
Thanks for your consideration.
Item number 5, case number 14462, request for a variance to the maximum height, square footage, and number of signs in the AA Agricultural District located at 1901 Spring Lake Drive.
Good afternoon, Mason Schwartz, 522 Colcord Drive, here on behalf of the applicant. This is a variance request. The applicant, owner of the property, is Metro Technology Centers. They're a nonprofit foundation. They have 4 campuses in Oklahoma City. This is a part of their Spring Lake campus. It is a career technology education facility. They are seeking the variance is necessary to erect a 2-sided pole sign on the frontage there along MLK of the subject site. Yeah, you can go ahead and pull it up. So this is kind of a visual of what it will look like from the south. To the east there across the property is Lincoln Park Golf Club. The property is kind of between 36th and 50th along the west side of MLK. This actual site is 12 acres, but it's a part of Spring Lake, or Metro Tech Spring Lake campus, which is a larger tract of 85 acres. So It's a pretty large campus, and that campus stretches to the south and the west of what's located as a subject tract. The sign itself, it is a two-sided pole sign. It's going to be height of 20 feet. The display area is going to be 12 by 9 on each side, which would total 108 square feet on each side. The actual EMD display area would be 12 by 6 on each side, which would total 72 square feet on each side. It is a level 1 EMD, which is appropriate in AA for non-residential uses, which means 8-second minimum before the next transition. The variances that we are seeking, as we understand it, are to the number of signs, the display area, and the height from 8 feet to 20 feet. In regards to the number, right now, this parcel has 3 signs in place, and I think they're kind of marked there. The monument, the 2 wall signs really do not serve as identification signs from MLK. You can see the wall sign to the west is not even visible. The wall sign to the east actually just reads clinic. It's really more of a wayfinding sign. As you're driving through the parking lot, it's not identifying MetroTech, the building as a whole. And the monument sign is really not visible from MLK. When you look at the property as you approach from either the north or the south on MLK Boulevard, there's heavy tree coverage. So really in either direction, you can't really see the campus until you kind of get right on it. And so we think because of the way the approach is with the tree coverage, because of the size and scope of the campus, that we believe that the height and the scope of the sign is appropriate. The EMD itself will help MetroTech adequately promote their own activities to students and the public at large. And we think there are some signs up and down MLK that are over 8 feet. There's the zoo up there to the east, which is a lot more intensive as far as light goes than the EMD sign. And with that, I don't believe we've heard of any protests. Happy to answer any questions and ask for your approval.
Board members, questions for the applicant?
This appears to me not to be a wayfinding sign. This is not a new campus. I mean, people don't have trouble finding this facility. This is simply a way to advertise activities at the school.
Correct. Yeah, this is not a wayfinding sign within the terms of the campus. This is a identification sign that's placed, meant to be read and viewed from MLK. Correct.
And I mean, we encourage drivers to pay attention to the driving, to not be looking at their phone and looking at other things. And it just, you know, it's another distraction. I mean, if it's simply a venue or you know, a place to show upcoming school activities and things like that, does it become just another distraction that you know, we tempt drivers and, you know, to catch their eye and to not be fully attentive to their driving?
And let me just clarify my answer before. I mean, it is partially aimed at the students on campus, and I think that would be a big part of it, is promoting on-campus activities, which is kind of the great thing about the EMD function, and partially also meant to be read from MLK for the public or the students traveling up and down MLK. In regards to the distraction, I think that's the importance of the level 1. It does create that 8-second transition minimum that allows a little bit less distraction, no animation, anything like that, and kind of functions a little bit more when you're viewing it as a traditional billboard would, and not consistently turning over.
Why a pole sign instead of a monument sign?
I think it's just a visibility thing with the trees. I mean, by the time you get past these tree lines, either from the north or the south, the tree lines go right to the north and the south line of MetroTech's property. So once you get through the tree line, you're on MetroTech's property as far as what's adjacent to you.
I think I understand all of that stuff. My primary concern, I didn't really see a need for exceeding the size by an extra 8 square feet. If it conformed with the 100 square foot instead of being 108, I think that would make it closer, at least for me, to approve it. This would be the second variance here.
Yeah, I think it has to do with the panel size and the way they sell it. It's not really something that you can just cut out 5 square feet or 8 square feet. It's kind of in chunks. So I think that's what they elected to do as far as the panels.
Are you trying to convince us that the sign company didn't consult Oklahoma City's ordinances before they designed their sign package? Is that what you're trying to tell us?
That is not what I'm telling you.
Because I'd find that hard to believe. I think this is a step too far for me. The sign is 20 feet tall. The allowance is 8. I'm not even bothered by the EMD as much as I bet a lot of people wish I would be, because I think I see the need to advertise the activities. But anytime somebody wants to do a pole sign instead of a monument sign, the truth is they're just trying to save some money. And I think aesthetically, there's been a desire to get away from those, to get away from the pole signs and to move toward monument signs that are landscaped and look really nice. And what we're shown is a monopole sign with a gigantic screen on it in that grassy area. I think it's a step too far for me. The other thing I would say is, again, the activities I understand. Most of these applications that come for us, people come and they say, oh, we have this 80-acre campus, we need wayfinding signs that are internal. I don't hold the wall signs against you at all. I mean, the sign that says clinic, I think that is more of a wayfinding sign. The campuses need those things, and the code certainly doesn't allow for that adequately. We've seen these cases like time and time and time again, and I'm sympathetic to that. But a 20-foot tall sign that's a pole instead of a monument to advertise activities is a big reach. That's my view on it.
I would also share the discussion regarding the size and the height of the sign. I understand that there's, especially when you're traveling out there, there's a need to be able to see where you're going, because you can get lost a little bit out there at your location. But I agree, the height coupled with the EMD combination, I just have trouble with the size altogether. Just didn't know if you had thoughts about maybe reducing your request to be a little...
Yeah, certainly. That's something we can look at. I think it would require a continuance if you guys would be willing to grant that, and we could reevaluate the size and scope, height, and see if we can come up with something that's more agreeable.
And I'm assuming that your client is willing to abide by the landscaping requirements of the sign, and
Correct.
I'm not opposed to a continuance to give them a chance to look at it again. I just don't think they thought through really what they were asking for as it related to what's allowed by the code and what would be reasonable given the use.
So I guess we'd ask for continuance.
Unless there's an objection to that, I'll take a motion.
Have we chosen a date? You've got April 19th.
The next hearing will be fine.
Okay.
Make a motion to continue case number 14462 to the 19th, April 19th.
A second.
I have a motion and a second to continue case number 14462 to April the 19th. Please cast your votes, please. The application is continued.
Item number 6, case number 14463, request for a variance to the minimum number of parking spaces in the PUD 1496 district located at 1101 Northwest 122nd Street.
Good afternoon. My name is Jared Crittenbrink, 935 Phils Way, Piedmont, Oklahoma, 73078. And then a brief overview of our request. We are requesting to reduce the number of required parking stalls per Oklahoma City Municipal Code. And the reason for the request is that currently 122nd West Development is building or Guernsey is designing for them a medical clinic that is located on the east side of the John H. Johnson Care Suites, an assisted living facility that is owned by the Community Enhancement Corporation. Guernsey also designed this facility, and this facility is currently under construction right now. The facility does have adequate parking, meets municipal code for the number of parking stalls, and all of that. The medical clinic that Guernsey is currently designing, that will be located on the east side of the assisted living facility, will contain currently it has a pharmacy within it, a physical therapy area, a child daycare, and then this is on the first floor. And then the second floor, as of right now, there are no tenants, but they are currently looking for tenants, and The idea is that they would have somebody such as optometrist, dentist, other medical-related services on the second floor of this building. The reason we are requesting the variance down to 88 stalls, if we were to, let me backtrack a little bit, if we were to fill the entire second floor with medical retail, we would require 115 stalls. If we were to fill the entire second floor with just medical offices without retail, we would require 100 stalls. Currently on the site, there are 88 stalls. If you look at the site layout plan, the access road that is coming onto the property on the south side, we are proposing to do a lot split on this property. The reason for the lot split is to eventually add another factor or another building that kind of helps this whole facility come together, meaning, maybe some other type of medical-related facility that serves a good purpose for the assisted living facility.
Are you referring to the undeveloped portion just to the southeast, that hard corner?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
Yep, and currently we are getting together with 122nd West Development to perform a lot split on that property. And the goal is right where you see that line that kind of splits the road. That's our desired lot split location. With the assisted living facility in mind, we are just trying to kind of develop a comprehensive plan that allows a lot of amenities to those individuals who are living at the facility. As you can tell, the medical clinic is connected to the assisted living facility, and CEC, the Corporation Enhancement, or the Community Enhancement Corporation, is in contact and talking through with 122nd West Development, the company who is developing the medical clinic itself. So they essentially, CEC owned this entire property. They deeded out this portion to 122nd West with the intent that 122nd West was going to develop it for the growth and cohesiveness of a kind of, little block there, community, helping all the individuals within the assisted living facility have everything that they would essentially need. So they can go to a pharmacy, they can go to physical therapy, et cetera, and just have that access right at that point. And so we are requesting from either, if they finish out the entire second floor with retail, it would be 100 stalls, so there'd be a 12 stall variance request there. And then with retail, there'd be 27 stall variance request. And if it was finished out with just office space, the requirement would be 100, so we would only be needing 12 spaces. The goal is that it would be, the developer does not believe that it will be all retail up above. He's thinking a psychiatrist, and the retail would be something like an optometrist who's selling, glasses or something like that. Once again, all medical-related services would be provided on the second floor. Any questions?
One question I have that's a staff question first is, this presumably could have been avoided if, the need for a variance could have presumably been avoided if there had been a cross-parking agreement that they could have presented at the time they got their permit, right, between the assisted living facility and their property. Is that accurate?
They probably already have that. The problem is the assisted living facility would have to have spaces in excess of their requirement that would equal the need for this permit.
Right.
And so now that's the second part of my question. Is that the case? Is it that they don't have is that the reason you guys didn't make that agreement? Is because they don't have enough spaces and allowable access to help you?
Right. So the assisted living facility itself, above and beyond code, once it does its future addition, it would only have 8 additional stalls. And at that point, the 8 additional stalls does not compensate for the number that we need.
Either 12 or 27, whichever one.
Exactly.
And you don't know because you don't have the use designated, so you don't know exactly what's required. Okay.
Yes, sir. Exactly.
Okay.
I have a question. The lot has not been split, correct?
Correct.
And so the unfavorable consideration is the land is present at this time and they're sufficient to provide the minimum number of parking spaces. Is that correct?
The land, so with the current bill, at one time, the development wanted to place a pharmacy on that side, but now they've moved the pharmacy into the medical clinic. So now they're just worried with the size of the building that they desire on that south side. and us laying it out, that there would not be adequate parking for that building. And when we lay it out, we can barely fit 100 stalls on that southern property. So our fear is that if we start taking up that southern property, we're going to be back here again trying to get a variance for that instead of a variance for this.
Well, and if you wanted that parking to be considered as a part of the application, you'd have to show it now, and you don't intend to build on that parcel because you're subdividing it. You're going to split it and sell it, or you're going to split it and let somebody else develop it,
Yes, sir.
right? So, I get it. You're either here now or you're here later, but you're not going to build a parking lot on something you don't own and you're not developing.
Right.
I get it. I'm with you.
I do have problems with the fact that this could be used in some other manner years down the line, and with the difference in the number of spaces. I do have a concern because you're addressing what it's planned to be, but it may not be in the future, so.
And I think that's the whole reason, one reason for the variance is the first floor for sure is what it is. There's a pharmacy, there's a physical therapy, and there's a daycare. The second floor is, like you're saying, they're looking for tenants. And if it's, someone like a psychiatrist, then we don't have the retail situation, so it's less stalls. But if it's somebody like an optometrist, now we have the retail space, which bumps up the required number of parking stalls we need. So that's kind of why we're here. Another reason, and I don't know if I clearly pointed it out, is that the majority of individuals who are going to be using the medical facility, I'm not saying all of them, but the vast majority, will be from the assisted living facility. Which,
And the medical clinic and the assisted, they're connected, right?
Yes.
I mean, you have a covered connection. Those buildings join.
Exactly, so that the people in the assisted living facility can simply walk over. They have no need to drive over and park in the medical clinic.
Silly question, but did you guys include in your permit application, did you guys include things like bike racks and other things that can reduce the, as silly as that seems?
I looked at that and I presented that to 122nd West, and they went back to their landscape architect, and the bike racks helped us out a little bit. It got us a few stalls, but doing additional landscaping, because of the size of the site, they didn't think that they could get the landscaping requirements and do the 25% reduction for the number of stalls out there. And once again, the whole 25% reduction was kind of tough to determine at this time because we don't know if we'll have 100 or 115, depending on how they finish out that upper space.
So does your plan contemplate the use of bike racks already, or no?
Yes, I brought it up to the client, we talked about it, and they are not wanting to put the bike racks in because putting the bike racks in will only give us a few additional stalls less, so we're still needing the variance for X amount of stalls.
You would still need it even if you did it?
Yes, sir. Yes.
I want to follow up on Diane's comments. I think you misunderstood. She's not talking about the current tenant mix. She's talking about future use of the building that may be different than what you contemplate now.
Okay.
And it's a concern of mine, too. I mean, you may make the argument that the tenant mix that you're proposing now, would be satisfactory with the number of spaces that you're requesting. But none of us knows how the use of that building may change over the years.
Right. And you're correct, but I would also to point out that the city does allow for a 25% parking reduction if you give the appropriate number of landscaping, bike racks, et cetera. Also, the PUD itself allowed for a 15% parking reduction if the parking was located behind the facility. So to me, it seems like, the number of stalls required by the city is actually, we don't need as many as they're saying.
Well, and other people have made that, to be fair, other people have made that argument in the past, that the parking counts and stall requirements that are laid out in the code as opposed to what really is needed today are different, and that's not a reason to grant a variance, but what appears in the staff report is that the request for the variance on the parking requirement is large, and that comment is not present here. I think I'm sympathetic to, you guys are going to develop this, you're really doing it to serve the facility. We're going to have this space we want to develop. If we knew for sure how the city would classify the use, we'd know our occupancy, and we could put bike racks and landscaping, and maybe we get close enough that really what we're asking for is 2 or 3 spaces.
Yes, sir.
it's also fair to say that we're holding up the development because we don't know how many of those things we have to do to get this done so that we can come back and develop the second story. Is that fair?
Exactly.
I mean,
and their goal is they're trying to, currently while the assisted living facility is being constructed, they're trying to get us pushed through design so that they can start construction on this facility before the crew leaves and is completed with construction on the assisted living facility.
Okay. Well, I mean, I understand what you guys are saying. I do. That's just my counterpoint to that is if we were asking for 40 stalls out of 115, that might be one thing. But ultimately what we may be asking for here is 10 to 12, and that depends on how many bike racks you can get to satisfy a coded,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that also assumes they're going to install bike racks. I think he said that they ruled that out.
No, I understood.
So, I mean,
But we could definitely, the thing is also, I mean, we could reduce it with, certain landscaping requirements. We could put, but if you look in the municipal code, putting the number of bike racks, you have to have quite a few bike racks to really make a dent.
well, and to your absurdity point, it's an assisted care facility.
I'm glad you said it and I didn't. I'm glad you said it.
Well, it came up in, what was it, the rehab case that we had where they had a bike rack argument. So that's a good point as well. There are just a lot of assumptions here that we have to make, a lot of uncertainties here, not knowing what the second story use is going to be, obviously not knowing tree trees, you can't know, not knowing about the bike rack issue or the landscaping issue. So I think to grant this, we would have to say that we don't care about any of those things, and we would, even in the worst case scenario, we would still grant that request, which I think would be, it sounds like 27 spaces would be the variance. I think that would be the worst case scenario that would be granting. I'd considered supporting it conditioned on the current configuration and if we can condition it on use. I think this is a pretty customized building that's not just going to, it's not just a box that could be converted to various different uses.
And I think, and to the point, I was taking, worst situation on that second floor, if all that was retail, if we need to make some type of contingency where not all of it's going to be retail. The owner, it feels very strongly about that, even if any of it's retail, which gets us back down to 100. So if we need to say X amount of feet will only be retail, the rest will just have to be office space, they would be okay with
I think that would have to be a part of the application that we can't do.
Yeah. And let me ask the question this way. Can you say to us today that you're certain that if you added the landscaping requirements and bike racks and things, as silly as it is, maybe as you think it is or your client thinks it is, that by doing that you couldn't comply with the ordinance as drafted? Are you 100% sure that's accurate?
According with the landscape architect, yes. I personally don't know. I don't know how to lay out the trees and do all that. But with the landscape architect saying, do we think we can get this to fit? It comes to, it's going to be tight. It would be very difficult to make it happen, to get the 25% reduction.
My biggest concern is just that we don't really want to put the bike racks in, and we don't really want to do the landscaping because it costs money, so we're going to try and circumvent it. I think I would feel better, and it's clearly very close up here in terms of the discussion.
Right.
I think I would certainly feel better knowing that you could say, we've looked at this, here's all the landscaping we can put in, we still can't get there.
Right.
I hate to push for it because
Right.
we don't try to be in the business of making continuances, but...
Right. And I will say, one thing to really point out about landscaping is if you do look on Western, per the PUD, we do have to, and this is my limited knowledge of landscaping, because I'm a civil engineer, I'm not entirely sure about that, but on Western, we do have to meet certain PUD requirements on putting trees, and we do have sanitary, water, gas, and sanitary is being installed for the assisted living facility, gas is being installed as well. So
that's a part of the zoning review and the plan process. I mean, that stuff's getting looked at. The city, they're checking those boxes, right? So
yes, they will. Right, when we submit for building permit. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Unless there's some objection by board members, somebody wants to make a motion, I would encourage a continuance. I just think that we would feel better if we're going to consider a variance on this issue, that we would know from you that you have looked at it very diligently and can attest to the fact that you can't meet the requirement any other way.
Okay, that is fair, completely.
Yeah, I certainly sympathize with your point about not wanting to look like we grant continuances and allow people to do that. So the only reason I would support a continuance is because there are so many uncertainties that I've already addressed.
And it also could be helpful maybe if at that time the owner has a better idea, or has additional tenants and knows for sure what the occupancy of the second floor is as well.
Well, I guess that means you don't want to continue for 2 weeks, because I don't think you're going to settle out tenancy requirements of your second story.
Let's do the 2 weeks, and I'm just saying, from when I last talked to him, there could be a potential that he pulled more tenants on, so 2 weeks is sufficient, or is that the next?
The next meeting we have would be April 19th.
Okay.
Board members, anybody object or want to make a motion here?
I move that item number 14463 be continued to April 19th. Is that correct?
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second to continue case number 14463 to April the 19th. Please cast your votes, please. The application is continued. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Item number 7, case number 14464, request for a variance to the maximum number and size of accessory signs in the AA Agricultural District located at 8400 Southeast 164th Street.
Is the applicant present? Okay. Well, we can, unless there's some objection, we can move, without motion, we can move case number 14464 to the end of the docket, correct? Okay, we'll do that just in case somebody happens to show up randomly.
Item number 8, case number 14374, appeal of the decision of Urban Design Commission regarding the denial of certificate of approval for UDCA 17-00001, located at 908 North Chartel Avenue.
Good afternoon. David Box, 522 Colcord Drive, here on behalf of the applicant, who's also with me, as well as several other folks with the design team. I've got a couple exhibits being handed out, one of which is a copy of the staff report that I presume would be in your packet already. And second is a packet of other images of structures along Chartel that I'll get into in a moment. I trust that everyone has read my notice of appeal. This is an appeal from an item that was denied by the UDC. As the board is aware, all appeals from the lower bodies are tried here de novo. So of importance, I think it's important we look at perhaps one of the reasons the UDC ultimately provided a denial of this application. I don't know if the staff provided you with a copy of the CD, or if you had the opportunity to watch the hearing. There were two main concerns at the UDC. The first being we did have an objector who has the house immediately to the south of us. Mrs. Hall was there in protest. It is worth noting that Ms. Hall has withdrawn her objection. She is no longer in dispute or in protest of this application. Secondly, despite the city...
On that point, I'm sorry, was that a rental property as well?
So she runs an Airbnb out of that.
Okay. And she dropped her objection, you just worked out a deal and she doesn't oppose it?
I wasn't involved, my client and her, and we've got a notice of withdrawal that has been executed by not only her, but another neighbor in the neighborhood, Mr. Clint Cowan, that I will provide Mr. Wilson at the end of this. But
okay.
It is my understanding that she runs an Airbnb out of that and is not her primary single-family residence. Oh, she does plan on moving in. But, yes, sir. So the other major point of contention at the Urban Design Commission was, if you look at our design, it's 3 attached single-family homes, and there are 3 separate lots. They've already been split, so they are 3 legal lots at this point. So the southern 2 lots have no legal and physical access except for that onto Chartel. So what you see in this image is the 2 garages that are off of Chartel. The city attorney at the UDC made it clear that the fact that They may not like us accessing Chartel, was not a matter to be considered. That is the only way that these two lots can legally access a public right-of-way, which is required for any lot. Despite the admonishment by Ms. Randall at the time, that was a major point that was discussed over and over again. Not the person that made the motion, but the person I believe that seconded the motion kept going back to it, and I think at one point said it didn't matter to him what the city attorney said. He just didn't like the fact that we would have garages on Chartel. So to that point, part of this exhibit, and I don't know how well you can see it, but we went up and down Chartel within a several block stretch, and if you had the opportunity to drive it, perhaps on your way downtown today, what you would notice is there are multiple curb cuts and access points off of Chartel. One of the things that I'm getting to here in a bit is the stretch of Chartel in the Cottage District has a very different feel and character than that Sosa neighborhood where all the modern homes are built. The kind of the meat or the heart of the neighborhood has a very different feel than up and down Chartel. One of the initial concerns raised by staff prior to some significant changes to our design was the scale and mass of this structure. And so what we provided were examples, and we have those here today, of other structures on Chartel. And I think it's important to focus on the difference in this Cottage District on Chartel and then west of Chartel in kind of the heart of that neighborhood. I do believe there's still one person that is in opposition that has formally written in opposition. I believe his name is Mr. Thurman. He has a house at what I believe the southeast corner of 9th and Chartel. So we're at the alley between 8th and 9th. So his single-family house right there at 9th and Chartel, immediately across the street from him to the north is a 5-story parking garage. And so as we kind of work up and down Chartel, you'll see scale and mass is common and appropriate. I think staff, Ms. Lisa Chronister is here, should the board have any questions, would agree that the character of Chartel is different. And perhaps that's part of the reason why staff recommended approval, because this application does conform to the applicable guidelines and regulations of both the Downtown Design District as well as the Downtown Framework. So the other corner of 9th and Chartel is a project not dissimilar to what we have here, except I believe it's 4 units. So the northwest corner of 9th and Chartel are 3-story, single-family attached condo-type project, similar to what we have here. If we move further south, 8th and Chartel, you've got a 3-story, an apartment building. Obviously, 10th and Chartel, you've got the lift apartments. As you move down to 7th and Chartel, you have the Valera Health, as well as Mr. Holmesley's law office, which is quite large as well. I believe it's at least 3 stories and fairly large in scale. This is an appeal that is similar to several other appeals that I have personally had in this area and in the Cottage District. The UDC for a while was turning down a host of different applications despite conformance with the guidelines because of scale and mass. One of the interesting things about the Cottage District is there were a number of people early on that came in to get variances from this body to be able to build single-story houses. And so you have a mix of single-story houses that were built, certainly legally through permitting, but because they were granted a variance to the building code to be able to build a smaller project. One of the cases you'll remember was a very large Mediterranean house next to a single-story house. The large Mediterranean house is a 2.5-story house, and it was denied because of scale and mass issues. That house is now built. I personally think it's a beautiful house, and I would submit that it fits in perfectly with the neighborhood. This neighborhood is a wonderful neighborhood in large part because it is an eclectic mix of different types of style, architecture, scale, and mass. So I do believe that this application conforms to the scaling and the massing of not only the guidelines, but certainly of the current development pattern up and down Chartel, when you look at the character of the developed lots along Chartel. So, again, the two main points were the individual to the south who had some concerns. She has now withdrawn all objections and concerns that she had. And the access, and I've covered the access. We have no other means to legally access a public right-of-way but for the two garages. So with that, what we have before you is an application that does conform to all of the guidelines and regulations of the Downtown Design District as well as the downtown framework. So we would ask that you uphold our appeal reversing the decision of the UDC and granting my client's CA. Be happy to answer any questions you have. Again, I've got several people here if you have specific questions as to design.
Board members, before we hear from anybody else, are there any questions of the applicant?
Couple questions.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, with respect to the withdrawal of the objection,
Yes.
I think it would be best to have that somewhere introduced in the record, because
I will.
during the hearing below and other places,
Sure.
there was an appearance, and so for the record.
What I'm going to do is I'll read it into the record, and then I'll hand a copy to Mr. Wilson, consistent with the certificate of service requiring me to do so. So it's entitled Notice of Withdrawal and Dismissal of Objection. Comes now Nancy Hall individually and as the member manager of MJN Properties, LLC, the owner of the certain property which is adjacent to the subject property at 731 Northwest 8th Street in Oklahoma City, and Clint Cowan, MJN's attorney and also an objecting neighbor homeowner. Hereby advise this tribunal of their withdrawal of all objections heretofore asserted in this cause and or in the underlying proceedings before the Urban Design Committee in UDCA-17-00001, and confirm that all disputes between MJN and Nancy Hall and Elite Urban Homes, LLC, and its contractor, the applicant, Tim Albro, have been resolved to the satisfaction of the undersigned, and that accordingly the undersigned do intend to, and hereby withdrawing all such objections with prejudice to the further assertion thereof, and hereby wish to express their support of the appellant applicant's application.
I have I want to address a couple other things. Did you redesign the wall that goes to that adjacent property?
Yes.
So that there is some space, because it appears that it's almost like a wall, and addressing you do have a larger footprint because of the combination of the mass and the zero lot line combination.
Sure. So we changed the design of the wall. One of the concerns staff had was it was a very blank wall, so we added some articulation and some detail to that wall. It is still a zero lot line project, and that's similar to other projects that have been approved by UDC in the Cottage District. You might recall an appeal that you heard, Mr. Merchant, you weren't here, but I believe the balance of the board was at 6th and Francis. It was 6 or 7 townhomes right there, fronting on 6th and Francis. Those likewise, they have the alley between it, but were a zero lot line type development. So it is consistent with other recently approved projects and compatible with the municipal code.
Now, wasn't there a suggestion that you cut back on part of that wall so there would be a little more space or a little less touching to the property line or something in the hearing?
I'm not aware of that. I know the staff, that's not one of the major concerns at this iteration of the staff report. There were some significant changes that are reflected in the staff report you have from the first time this went before UDC to the second. And so staff actually changed the recommendation from that of denial to that of a recommendation for approval based upon some of the significant changes made in the design.
I have a couple questions as well. When was the lot split completed on the property?
I don't know.
Is it recent?
I mean, fairly recent, within a year or so. I mean, it was not a long ago lot split.
Okay.
I believe Mr. Johnson with Johnson and Associates was the one that perfected that.
Was that application, was that lot split completed under the existing applicant's ownership?
Yes.
Okay. And in the staff report from May 24th, 2017, I just want to address a couple of things with you. So if I read this thing before I get to the conclusion, I'm not sure that I saw the recommendation for approval coming. So I want to address a couple of points. It says, the scale of the proposed structure may also be an issue. It is a 3-story structure that is 41 feet tall at the highest point along the south wall. At this height, the proposed structure may appear to loom large over the existing adjacent single-story residence, which is estimated to be 13 feet high. Another point, this abrupt change from 13, a little further down, this abrupt change from 13 feet to 39 feet could be considered an insensitive transition to the adjacent structure and would suggest that a greater separation distance be strongly considered, or alternatively that the building be reduced in height and or that the roof slope be redesigned to minimize the height on the south end of the project. Next paragraph. With the combination of the proposed lot coverage, zero lot line design, lack of fenestration, and the height difference between adjacent structures, this project may not provide an appropriate transition and may not respect the scale, character, and architectural detailing of the adjacent use. Can you address, I mean, just some of the, you have addressed some of those points, but staff clearly saw that within the confines of, and I don't know how many cases we've seen recently. I know Jeff and I have seen these cases, and I'm pretty sure Diane has been on the board where we've had these, but we've seen a number of these cases. You alluded to some of them. I heard all the cases you mentioned in regards to the DTD1 and the Cottage District. And one of the things that has always bothered me about this is the preamble to the DTD1, which is provided in the staff report, talks about the need to have this broad range, diverse development that's accepting of all kinds of things. And they also clearly define that they want larger scale. Because one of the things that arguably got us to this point is that a lot of folks were granted variances to construct single-story homes that were contrary to the code. Now, in this instance, the structure that was there has been there a long time. But it also wants you to look at the scale of the area. So there's a lot of confusing points about this, which is why all these cases end up here instead of being settled there. But when I look at this application, I hear staff's concern about those issues, and you've addressed them a little bit, but speak to that specifically. I mean, what has changed from May 24, 2017 in line with these discussions to now with the application and the design of the structure?
Well, I think the biggest change is the person that perhaps staff was concerned with that led to the comments about respecting that home has withdrawn all objections and now, pursuant to their document that you now have, and I'll quote, wishes to express their support of the application. The paragraph that you read, or the portions thereof, I believe are almost identical. If I were to pull the appeal that I had of Ed Lynn's house, I bet it reads almost identical with the changing of Chartel for, I believe he's on Dewey.
Why do they do that? Because you're actually, these comments are always extraordinarily similar.
Sure.
Why?
I don't want to speak for staff. But because there is that in the guidelines there are comments about the scale and the mass, and you're right, it causes confusion because it appears that you've got a bunch of conflicting provisions. We're wanting to develop with scale and mass and encourage verticality, but at the same time there was a rush of people several years ago coming to this board seeking variances to build single-story homes, which creates a lot of the conflict with the scale and the mass next to a home that wouldn't have a staff report saying it meets the intent of the guidelines. Because that staff report would have to say it doesn't meet the intent, because they would have had to get a recommendation from the UDC to come to this board to get the variance necessary to build that structure.
Well, the point I was just trying to make in looking at the staff report is that if you read it, again, if you don't read the conclusion, if you just read the application, you're led to believe that they are not going to recommend approval, and then they do. But we're not told why, in that report, they make that recommendation, other than what they say at the very end.
Sure. And like I said, all I can suspect is at the time there were written objections on file from the individual to the south. But I think staff would agree with me that Chartel has a little different character. You know, I mean, perhaps a scenario exists where if this was in the heart of the neighborhood, it would have been a little different recommendation. But Chartel is very different. You know, as I displayed through the exhibits on this board, and as you have there in front of you, you have varying scales and mass, and you have some existing single-family homes that still kind of front on Chartel that have thrived and I think done well with this emerging development pattern that is ongoing in this part of the city.
Okay. Any more questions for the applicant? Lisa Chronister is here, and I think maybe she can shed some light on my concerns, the report, and maybe a few other things. So.
Yes, Lisa Chronister, current Planning and Urban Design Division of the Planning Department. As Mr. Cravens, what I think you're picking up on is the case first went to the March 22nd UDC meeting, and that staff report listed out like 5 different issues that staff identified. And by the time of the May 24th meeting, there have been various changes that whittled down those issues for us that led us to the recommendation for approval. But the text in the remaining issues remain the same. And I think that's why there appears to be a disconnect. I agree with you. It's not just knowing the history of it, it makes sense. But if you are reading it anew, it doesn't quite make sense.
Is there a reason that as those changes evolve that they're not memorialized in staff reports before they come back before the body that's hearing it?
They usually are, and even this portion, it was tweaked from, yes, we go back through. Sometimes it's as simple as just removing it. We do try to go back and pick it back up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just while I'm here, I wanted to pick up on something, Diane, that you had mentioned. At the May 24th meeting, staff made a recommendation in the meeting that they could reduce part of the third floor roof. So that you're probably remembering it from the meeting video. It was never made a motion or condition by the commission.
Any other questions for Ms. Chronister, board members?
I mean, I think, to touch on your point for a second, it looks like through the iterations of the staff reports and some of the changes with the design, they started satisfying several of the different technical aspects that are easy to meet, so square footage or height and things like that. Some of the design things that are discretionary, they adjusted and got closer and closer. But at the end of the day, scaling and massing and, you know, fitness and things like that with the adjacent properties, that stuff's just discretionary. And so that's ultimately, they convinced staff, but they didn't convince the committee, so the commission.
If there's no other questions for the applicant or the members of the design team that are here, we do have a number of people that are signed up to speak in protest of the application. So I'm going to go ahead and call them forward unless there's other questions. Good. First person signed up to speak is Linda Mioli. Did I get it? All right. Please come forward. Give us your name and address for the record.
Good afternoon. My name is Linda Mioli. I live at 607 Northwest 7th Street. Before I go into what I wanted to say, I wanted to clear up one thing, and you can see it in the staff report on May 22nd. When this first came to the UDC, it was one lot. That property was one lot. And the first report talks about the fact that the parking, therefore, had to be on the alley because it was one lot and they were putting how many buildings they were putting on it. So between the March staff report and the May staff report, they replatted the property and put it into 3 plats. And on page 2 of the staff report on May the 22nd, previous actions, the second one says, a plat was filed and approved to split the lot into 3 individual parcels aligning them, so therefore they themselves blocked the access to the alley, and therefore now they had to keep the garages on Chartel because they themselves made it impossible to put that parking on the alley. So I just wanted to clear up. Mr. Box obviously didn't remember that, but that's in the record as to what happened. The other thing is I didn't see the pictures that he was showing you, but I know he was talking about 9th Street, the the Lisbon Lofts, and he was talking about the lift apartments. Those are not in the Cottage District. Those are outside of the Cottage District, and therefore there are different guidelines to follow with regard to that. What I came here today to is to implore you as members of the Board of Adjustment to preserve the beauty and the integrity of the Hall House and deny the appeal. The Hall House, as you know, it's located at 713 Northwest 8th Street. It's directly south of the project that the developers are, which is the subject of the appeal. It's in the heart of the neighborhood of Sosa, which is south of St. Anthony. I am a resident of Sosa. The Hall House was built 113 years ago. Nearly 6 years after the city was first settled, and 2 years after Oklahoma became a state. I hope you have had a chance to go, this has been continued so many times, to go down and view that property. There are pictures in the record, I know, but it doesn't do them any justice. And I'm not an architect, nor do I have any knowledge of it, but I think the Hall House represents one of the best examples of a mix of modern and Spanish architecture, not only in our neighborhood, but in the city as a whole. In the brief filed, the developers argue that the Hall House is not in compliance with the DDT regulations, and quoting it, it says, is therefore operating in a legally non-conforming manner. That statement to me clearly demonstrates a complete indifference to the fabric of our community. The Hall House was here long before the city developed all these regulations for buildings, and it's one of the few original homes that is still well maintained in our district, and therefore will never be subject to demolition. Now, whether or not, I call it the Hall House because it now belongs to Nancy Hall, whether or not Ms. Hall entered into a monetary agreement with the developers to not object to this or not, that house will continue long after Nancy Hall owns that house. And I'm just here to, you've got the power to keep that house intact and to preserve its beauty, and I just beg you to do that. Thank you.
Ms. Miller, before you leave, just two questions. Do you know, is the Hall House, as you referred to it, is that designated as a historic residence or historic property in any way?
I'm not quite sure that it is or not, but there was a study done a couple of years ago, and it's eligible for it.
But my question would be, and I want to make sure, just to understand the point, could Ms. Hall presumably go to City Hall tomorrow and obtain a demolition permit to remove the property?
She'd have to go through the UDC, and the UDC has made it very clear that unless there have been houses that have been demolished in our neighborhood, but they were in disrepair and beyond rehabilitation. This house is in perfect condition. In fact, she is using it to support herself at this point as an Airbnb. So the UDC, the likelihood of having the UDC approve that demolition is slight to none.
Second question I have for you that's really more on point for you, just as a point of clarity. One of the challenges, at least for me as a member of this board, is that I take the directives that I use from the ordinances. And city council drafts, prepares, and adopts these ordinances, and that is what provides the legislative, in some instances, it's really guidance on what their intention was. And the challenge that I've always had in this district with these cases is that the council has put forth that they want this area, they are encouraging redevelopment, and they want it to redevelop in a more dense way than it has been historically. And that's why the point is made in the application of, hey, this is a legally kind of non-conforming type use, is because if you wanted to build what they're building here as a one-story property, they would have to come to this board and get a variance to do that, which is a conflict point. I just was curious if you could address that for me.
What my opinion on that is?
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, I think it was the Planning Commission came to the neighborhood and said, what do you want? What do you want to do to preserve your neighborhood? And we made recommendations. We had meetings with them. We made recommendations to minimize the height from 50 back to 35, which it was a number of years ago. We talked about setbacks. We talked about all different kinds of things. It got to the point they were going to put it together, and then the developers came in and said, wait, listen to us. We don't even want a 50-foot maximum. We want to build as high as we can. We don't want any setbacks at all. We don't want this. So the city compromised by leaving it the way it was. So that's my take.
Board members, other questions?
Yes, during the hearing below, as I recall, because I listened to it, that the issue about the lot split and the entrances, the exits of entrance and exits from Chartel were really not before. Because that was really the only way they could get in and out of the structure.
Not when the initial staff report was made. Not when the initial staff report was made. The only access they had was through the alley.
But that staff and attorney, as I recall, mentioned that that was legally done and that resolves the issue. So really that issue, I will defer to my attorney on this. Is that issue before us to even look at that?
The lot split had been accomplished before this application was denied by UDC, so that was not an issue before the UDC for consideration.
I understand that, but the question came up, and I just wanted to answer the question as to when the lot split was made. It was made between the first staff report and the second staff report, and the first staff report argued that the parking had to be on the alley. And they corrected it, but then they made their own problem, which was, oh, well, now we can't park on the alley.
Well, I brought that up, and the reason that I brought that up is because in our packet there is a design statement from March the 1st, 2017 that shows front garages, and I'm not saying that you have to like it or agree with it, but if the owner realized they had a problem and they went to the Planning Commission and got this thing platted to allow for the development, they've done that in a way that lawfully allowed them to do so. That, at that time, that discussion would have taken place of, we are altering these lots to remove access from the alley. We can't, again, it is not before us, but I think the point should be made that it looks to me, though, this design was brought forth, they figured out they had a problem, and then they went to remedy it, which I think is on point for our discussion. So while it may be frustrating, it was legally done.
I understand completely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The next person I have signed up to speak on the matter is Bill Bleakley.
Good afternoon. I'm Bill Bleakley. I live at 607 Northwest 7th, residing with Ms. Mioli, my wife. I'd like to throw out sort of a rhetorical response. Why do we have the UDC? Why do we have the Board of Adjustment if all we're dealing with is as long as you're building it only so wide and so high and you're meeting all of the requirements of the code, why do we have a cottage district? Why do we have an urban design commission? Well, the original concept is there was some discretion on the part of the commission as to what's going to fit into making the cottage district. And for many years, we had people coming in doing eclectic designs and making this a great place within the parameters. When it caught on, we now have this development process that says how many units can we possibly squeeze in to the parameters that are provided. And I suggest that if that's the rule of law, then let's get rid of all this process and just have a checkoff sheet. If you meet it, let's proceed. What I'd like to address with regard to the case in hand is the matters that Mr. Box brings up with regard to Chartel Avenue. The east-west streets in the cottage district are basically residential streets, and we have three arteries within it, and those are Lee Avenue, Chartel, and then Francis to the west of Chartel. Chartel is a major thoroughfare in the city. There is a lot of traffic on Chartel, and it goes at a very high speed. So we have safety issues. As we redevelop Red Andrews Park and have many more children and such involved, it's going to be more of a safety issue. We have a neurology clinic going in right diagonally northeast across the alley from this property, which will have a large parking lot, putting cars onto 9th Street and the alley. Their parking lot will access onto the alley that's behind this property. We have a fourplex going in immediately across the street. The Combs, the developers of this, were responsible to the needs of the cottage district, and they have 8 units, all exiting the garages onto the alley behind there. They did not ask for any curb cuts. So let's talk about curb cuts on Chartel. Between 10th Street and downtown, there is only one existing residential curb cut connected to the garage, and it's at the Hall property. It was designed for a Model T vehicle. It is inoperative for modern vehicles. Ms. Hall does not use it as a functioning driveway. It is a storage part of the property that she has. It is very important for safety reasons to keep Chartel as a free-flowing thoroughfare through our neighborhoods, and we are hopeful that as the bike ordinances ultimately come to play, there will be significant bike lanes on Chartel going through it. Right north of the property on 9th Street is a what I call dead man's curve. You have a tremendous amount of traffic coming off of St. Anthony. There's a sign there that says right turn only because there's a dog leg that blocks vision south on Chartel, and that is generally ignored as people just go wherever they choose. So here we have a bizarre situation of the lot that the Hall house is on got split in half, and we're dealing with a 60-foot by 70-foot thing. The reason it got split in half is a former owner mortgaged half of the lot. It got foreclosed on, and Mrs. Hall bought it at a foreclosure sale. She was unaware of the fact that the lot in question was not considered in the sheriff's sale for the mortgage, and there was no taxes paid on it, and it went up for taxes, and the developer bought the property out of tax sale. It leaves a situation where you have the utilities for the Hall house running through the segregated plot. So you've got, to begin with, a bizarre situation. There is an axiom in equity that I learned in law school is that you cannot benefit from a circumstance that you create yourself when you have been harmed by the circumstance. So they bought this lot, and now they have created 3 lot splits through development services to provide the opportunity to exit on Chartel, and then they claim a hardship because they own these 3 lots and they can't develop them because they have to exit on Chartel. The people across the street put in 4 units, and are exiting them all on the alley. So we have some real issues with safety there. And finally, there was talk about, well, Chartel is Chartel and it has nothing to do with the neighborhood. Well, it's the gateway to the neighborhood. The vast majority of extraneous traffic to Sosa and Cottage District come up and down Chartel. So what we want to demonstrate that this is a very eclectic, primarily residential district that is inviting and shows what's on the residential streets that come off of it. The density issue is an interesting one. I'm guilty of building one of the one-story houses. There are 5 new structures built on our house. All are 2-story except ours, but every one of them have 2 people in them. So what's the density issue here? If you're building a residence, and this neighborhood is typically not family, but people beyond their child-rearing years that are building houses in this area, density is not a factor on this. And hopefully we still have some viability to the discretion of this board and the Urban Design Commission that says when you build a huge blank wall and 5 feet from the structure of a historical nature, that it shouldn't happen. So thank you very much for your time.
The next person that has signed up to speak is Kevin Thurman.
Good afternoon. My name is Kevin Thurman. I live at 924 North Chartel, which is the house directly to the north of this project. I would agree with everything that has been said before us so far. I've lived there since 2002, and so I was here before any of this started happening. And as I've seen the neighborhood grow, I have seen more pedestrian traffic, I've seen more bicycle traffic, I've seen people walking by with strollers, which I never thought would happen in the neighborhood. As far as the 2 garages and cutting the curb on the Chartel on the arterial street, there is a code 5910-800 that says any driveway, egressing a driveway onto an arterial street, you must have 400 feet vision in each direction. And this is measured from a 15 feet from the edge of the property to 3.5 feet high to 4 feet, 3 3/4 feet to be able to see down the street. Now, if you've driven up Chartel Avenue, you know how it is a hill like that. And going back to what Bill said, yes, I live on that dogleg corner on 9th, and it is a right turn only because you cannot see what's coming up Chartel. Now, as far as them backing out onto Chartel, not with 1 garage, but with 2, they're never going to be able to see the cars coming up Chartel. And then he also mentioned the bike lane that is going to come through there that is going to be designated. So not only are they going to be backing across a sidewalk, they're going to be backing across a bicycle lane too, which to me that just creates a huge conflict area that is not there now. Another thing I'd like to bring up is that the density of it is, this is a 60 by 70 lot that they're wanting to put 3 units on, which if you look at that, that would be equivalent to putting 6 units on a 50 by 140. Now I know in the neighborhood down in the Cottage District, the Haas brothers wanted to build 3 units on 2 separate lots that were 50 by 140, and they were denied because of the sheer density of the project. This is half of the amount of that. And I just feel that the density of the project is just too much for that small of a lot. I also agree with everything that was said about them splitting the lot after the fact to create a hardship on themselves so they would not have alley access. And for me, sitting there looking down to the south, I'm going to be looking at a 50-foot wall on my alley. Another thing I'd like to bring up is the topography of the property. From Chartel heading back east, it is about a 6 or 7 foot rise, which I've questioned them before as to how they are going to drive in off of Chartel and still have the garages on the back of this property at the same level, seeing as it's 6 feet higher. Also, with the 42 feet high of the project, they're measuring that from the rear of the property, which will make the front of that property even more dominant facing Chartel. Another thing I'd like to say, just because it falls within the conformity of the law, just because it's legal, as Bill said, just a checkbox off, just because things are legal, sometimes it doesn't make it right. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. The next person signed up to speak in protest of the application is Brian Fitzsimmons.
I'm not going to add or repeat anything. I agree with all of that, but I do believe there is a potential now legal issue by creating a lot split. By creating a lot split, they're intended to be fee simple, and therefore it makes them single-family houses. And with single-family houses, even though they abut, they have to conform to the required setbacks, which means it cannot be any further forward than other houses on the same side of the street. And by going all the way to the west property line, it is. The other houses are further back. Simple point. And that is a regulation, not a guideline.
Board members, that's the last person that I have signed up to speak in opposition to the application. Are there other people that wish to be heard from a protest perspective on this item? If not, Caleb Baker has signed up to speak in support of the application, so we hear from her at this time.
Good afternoon. My name is Kayla Baker. I live at 809 Northwest 8th Street. I'm a resident in the neighborhood directly across the street, and I feel like they are abiding by guidelines and code and should be allowed to develop this. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Members of the board, just very briefly, I'm just going to reiterate again what your counsel has stated, that the lot split issue is not an issue to be considered. The staff report addressed it, the counsel at the UDC addressed it, and your counsel here has addressed it. So what's before you is not how or why or how we're going to get access. It's the design of the building based upon the modifications made and its compliance with all applicable regulations and guidelines that are required to be followed within this district. So with that, I do want to stress the importance of the steps that my client took to make significant design revisions in working with staff and hoping to appease the neighbors. As this body is aware, there are certain times where perhaps people just don't see eye to eye. You can't always satisfy everybody. But I think it is worth, re-emphasizing that the person perhaps most affected has withdrawn all objections. It does lend support to this application. So we'd be happy to answer any further questions you might have. We'd ask for your support.
Board members, comments, questions?
I'm prepared to make a motion when our discussions and deliberations are complete.
Does anybody have any comments they want to make before a motion is taken or made?
I move that we sustain the decision of the Urban Design Commission in case UDCA-17-0001 and deny the application for a certificate of approval for the reason that the evidence supports the decision of the UDC that the project does not comply with Design Guidelines Section 7200.1.G4 development pattern because it is inconsistent and inappropriate with the approximate scale, character, and architectural detailing of the adjacent uses.
If there's no second to the motion, then we're going to take some other comments. So,
yeah, the concerns of the immediate adjacent neighbor that withdrew her concerns, they're important for present purposes, but of course she's not going to own the property forever, and that could change in 20 years. That said, I'm struggling to think about what type of development that would fit within the regulations that, based on the concerns that I've heard today, the protestants wouldn't protest to that development as well. I mean, you're going to have, I would think, a large wall. You're going to have the same scaling and massing issues that don't conform with what's been called the Hall property. So that's one of my primary concerns, is I'm not sure what development could happen in this lot that would not draw the same objections.
Well, what I'll say on that point is, and you know, Mr. Bleakley alluded to this, the challenge, frankly, with this area is the ordinances themselves. And there are plenty of instances where the city council, through proper legislative process, the same way, to be frank, which is ultimately the point I wanted to clear up, and I intended to unmuddy the water, but I think I made it worse. If somebody goes and has a property replatted, on its face, we are told we just assume that that's legally correct. We have to, because it's been properly platted. And to Mr. Fitzsimmons' point, if there are issues with setbacks and other things, those are addressed in a zoning review and an application review on a permit to construct a property. So those things come up, and those folks will have to come back and get a variance to those issues if there are setbacks violations or other things. But there are lots of instances where we are given clear directives from council on how to interpret certain issues. And there are a lot of instances where we're not given clear directive. I think, and I have to guess because I'm not given clarity here, that the council, by its intention, didn't know what was going to happen in the Cottage District. They didn't know what was going to happen in the south of St. Anthony area. They had no idea, and they didn't want to try to pretend that they were going to. So they created ambiguous ordinances and essentially guidelines to guide groups like the UDC, who then have to interpret them. And I think that if you do that, you can assume that that's done almost intentionally. And I think if there's nothing wrong with that, but it makes it hard to say, well, this is proper or it's improper, or this fits within the ordinance or it doesn't. If they came before us with, or they came before the city with an application to get a permit for a single-story structure, they'd have to get a variance. If they come with this, they have to get it approved for UDC, and it's denied. Staff recommends approval, but it's denied. How do you reconcile those things? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but it's one of the more challenging things that I think we face, because we don't have a great directive about what should guide us. But ultimately, what I've always leaned back on is the preamble to the DTD1, that they want to encourage different types of development that respect different types of scale and design and architecture, and that's a clear statement, and that's why it's hard not to support the application, in my view, and overturn. But
I think a couple of things to remember. First of all, staff reports are not binding. They are a resource for UDC, just like it's a resource for us. It is not binding on us. It's a recommendation, and it's a resource for us. The other thing to remember, and we had another recent case where a use was allowed, and there was a strong argument against allowing this use to occur in this location. And we talked about the fact that the reason that you have a UDC and you have a DDRC is that where they have authority and discretion, and that's what those commissions are for, is to, take what may be clear, what may be ambiguous, to act within their authority and within their prerogative to make a recommendation and to make a decision. And I'm not going to, I feel that, very strongly that, they did their work and they did it properly. I think, the points that are made by, the neighbors and the others that have spoken on this, I'm particularly sensitive to the fact that just because a use is allowed, you're right. It doesn't mean you just go through and check it off and that every use within that category. There was a recent article in the Journal Record, there's going to be development north on Lincoln, and they have already said, there'll be no bingo parlors, there'll be none of this. These are uses that are allowed there, but the decision has already been made that they are not appropriate and they are not going to be a part of that development. So UDC has the discretion, and it's based on not only the input of the neighborhood and the people that live around there, but the application of the guidelines that they have before them.
Yeah, and I'm not basing my decision on the staff report at all. I suspect what Mr. Box is going to say here is the standard here is not abuse of the UDC's discretion. It's de novo review. And so they have their own discretion. We have our own discretion. I'm reluctant to call the regulations ambiguous. I think they allow for discretion. I think I would go that far. And UDC has exercised their discretion. And, you know, I think we are entitled to exercise our own discretion by designing the statutes.
I would like to add one other comment to that. I believe that the UDC failed to actually properly, the motion was to deny, and they didn't have enough votes. Is that correct, to get the denial? And it was a deemed denial. Is that correct? It wasn't. It was a full denial? Okay. But as it's a de novo review before us, and I think what's really important is during the process, the applicant has made all the way through efforts to get the neighbors agreeable to what's going on, and in fact has the major person protesting withdraw it in support, and that means something to me. That person now has withdrawn and now has supported the application, and so I feel that I can support this, the reversal in this particular case.
Yeah, and again, I've expressed my view on that point. I think that's important, but ultimately I don't think that it's conclusive on the decision, because she won't live there presumably forever, and you know, the next 10 and then 30 years might disagree wholeheartedly with that. So again, it is important. To Mr. Craven's point about whether you demolish this, you know, what we call the hall residence, and build something new, you couldn't build it as it currently is designed. There is a difference, and I'm short for words to articulate the difference, but I think there is a difference between new development and something that's existed since the 20s. And I think that the code recognizes that. So I think there is a distinction there that, you know, I wouldn't put so much weight on the fact that you couldn't just knock this down and rebuild the exact same thing, because there is a certain character of something being there for 100 years. That said, I go back to my original point. I'm not sure how this property could be developed in a way that would not draw the same objections. Not that that's conclusive on this decision, but given that backdrop, I don't think that this current project is outside of those parameters enough that I would deny the application.
The options are to develop a structure that's not a zero lot line and that's not that tall, so that the transition between a new structure and the surrounding neighborhood is not as dramatic. I think that's one of the things that UDC, and they naturally heard the objections of the neighbor to the south, and as that objection has been withdrawn for whatever reason. But it doesn't change the fact that you still have a zero lot line and you have this very high wall very close to the adjacent structures. And I think, you're right, you may never find something that pleases everybody, but there are certainly options for development there that don't require a zero lot line or don't require, a structure this height, or that they can articulate architecturally so that there's, a better transition between adjacent structures and a new building.
Apparently, I'm doing a bad job of articulating my thoughts today, but the staff report is not determinative, but the staff's job is to review the ordinances, right, and to prepare a report that says whether or not, to the UDC, to tell them whether or not this project is respectful of those ordinances and those guidelines, and then to make a recommendation. The board decides. They have the authority to do that. As Mr. Merchant points out, it's de novo review, and that's where I come back to it. People can be upset about it, but to say that there's not ambiguity here, I think is frankly not, I think you're being a little generous. I think it is ambiguous. And I think that the idea that we are to say, well, we're not going to allow this development, but we're going to allow something else, is to be subjective. And my problem with being subjective is that that's not something we're supposed to do unless we can find things to support that within guidelines or ordinances. Your subjectivity is still limited, And so to find objectiveness here is really what's challenging, and that's because when you say things like, these guidelines are intended to promote the development and redevelopment of the downtown area in a manner that's consistent and compatible with existing and unique diverse design elements of downtown Oklahoma City, I mean, that sounds pretty ambiguous to me. And so I look at the other areas, I look at the development as a whole, and if you look at it, there are other places where the massing is appropriate. There are other places that are built that way. There are other places that are that height, that scale. Who am I to say that this isn't appropriate? It appears that it is appropriate within that context, which again is the preamble to the entire ordinance itself, where the guidelines come from.
Because UDC said it wasn't appropriate.
And I think the UDC got that wrong.
The staff report says the scale of the proposed structure may also be an issue.
They did say that, and then they recommended approval.
But it doesn't erase the fact that the proposed structure and the scale of it may be an issue.
I agree.
They didn't just, present you a blank piece of paper and say,
I think we all know where we all stand. We've had, I think, an effective discussion to it. A motion has been made. It wasn't seconded. Is there another motion that we want to entertain as a board?
Yeah, I'll move to reverse the decision of the Urban Design Commission, case number UDC 17-1, and grant the application for certificate of approval for the reason the evidence does not support the decision of the UDC, because the project meets the applicable regulations and the guidelines of the Downtown Design District zoning ordinance as stated in the Urban Design Commission staff report.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to reverse the decision of the Urban Design Commission and approve and issue the certificate of approval for case number 14374. Please cast your votes, please. And the application is approved. We had moved an item to the end of the, do we want to call that item now?
Item number 7, case number 14464, request for a variance to the maximum number and size of accessory signs in the AA Agricultural District located at 8400 Southeast 164th.
So I'm Greg Little with City of Oklahoma City Public Works Construction Project Manager. On behalf of Public Works, we're requesting for a variance to allow more than the maximum number of signage on our new fire station that we're building. This is out at 8400 Southeast 164th Street. We're requesting the variance to put these signs out, one for public safety, to notify the public that this is a fire station, to let them know this is the City of Oklahoma City, the fire station number 29 there, and the sign, the monument sign that has a scrolling message. We'll also provide public safety announcements. They can say burn bans in effect and other information to provide to the public. So we're requesting approval of additional signage on that frontage.
JJ, question for you. Is the monument portion, the brick, I can't remember in these things, is that included in the signage? Is it included in the square footage?
Yes, the total.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So the brick area that has nothing on it is included in the square footage. My only comment would be, while all these cases stand on their own, we've seen these before in the arguments about public safety, the fact that these firehouses are safe places that need to be readily identifiable or well-known. So if there's no objection or discussion, I'd take a motion.
Make a motion to approve the application, case number 14464, that it has met statutory standards for a variance request.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second to approve case number 14464. Please cast your votes, please. And the application is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you. So last item, are there additional items or communication reports from board members or the municipal counselor's office? No? Apparently no citizens to be heard. No new business that I'm aware of, so I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion to second to adjourn, even though we don't need it. We are adjourned.